disparage the good name of Andy Weir by comparing him to Stephanie Myers, but I will say Project Hail Mary and the host had one thing in common. They both had really interesting aliens. Let's talk about that. Project Hail Mary follows some man as he wakes up in a place with robots and mummies. Seriously, that's it. That's her introduction. The book starts with the main character waking up in a strange room with no memories and no idea what's going on. We learn pretty early on that he was sick, both because the robot arms are trying to run cognitive tests on him, which he is failing, and because he's hooked up to machines and catheters and other fun medical devices. Plus, there are mummies, which right away tips us off to how strange the situation is, because mummies can only be created in specific environments, so having them there implies that he's in a sterile environment where normal decay didn't happen, and things only get weirder when he gets up. Naturally, him getting up is hard, but he realizes right away that it's harder than it should be, and the main character can't get any answers because he's trapped in the sterile room until he can pass the cognitive test. We learn pretty early on that his name is Rylan Grace, and he's a single bachelor who likes children. Because he's a teacher, and there are problems with the sun, but we didn't learn exactly what the problem is because once Rylan remembers his name, he's able to leave the medical bay and enter the lab, and this is where he starts running experiments to figure out what's going on and where he is. And after some math and science, he figures out that there's too much gravity, which means wherever he isn't on Earth, because you can't mess with gravity on Earth. Well, technically you could, but it would take an immense feat of engineering and energy to have people spinning around fast enough in a big enough centrifuge to maintain high gravity on Earth. So Rylan figures people did the easier option and just went into outer space.
Let's take a rocket ship.
So now Rylan has to figure out why he's in space, and slowly but surely he starts to remember what's going on. He remembers meeting Eva Stratt, who forcibly drafts him to help with the problem with the sun. As it turns out, the problem is aliens. There's bacteria-like aliens called astrophage who are eating the sun's energy output before it can get to Earth, which is making it appear dimmer to us, which is a big problem. So the world turns to Eva to try and save them, and now Eva's carving a warpath to figure out how, and this involves recruiting Rylan because he wrote a paper on the speculative biology of alien life, and how maybe you don't need water for life to exist. And given that astrophage lives on the sun, everyone assumes there is no water in them. And they're wrong, because Rylan manages to kill an astrophage, and they learn that once you break through its little shell, there is water in the little cells. They're just incredibly efficient in what they do with energy and where they put it. And once this breakthrough is made, they decide they don't need Rylan's speculative biology anymore, and send him home. And he lasts about a day back home teaching his class before he breaks. He can't stand to look at these kids knowing their future is in peril. So he goes back to Eva and demands to be put back to work trying to stop astrophage. And she lets him. She gives him 3 astrophage, 3 cells to work with because labs all over the world are working with tiny amounts of astrophage they managed to get from a recent space mission.
Aliens!
So Rylan makes another breakthrough. He figures out how astrophage breed and how to breed them in a lab. And side note, thanks for giving us the tools to learn how its cells multiply in laboratory settings, Henrietta Lacks. So now laboratories all over the world can breed their astrophage and they can somewhat harness the energy they put out, which leads to Eva to transport her team, including Rylan, to a jet hangar in the middle of the ocean. Because just a handful of astrophage giving out their full energy output at once is the equivalent of a nuke, and you want those to go off far away from population centers. And while they're on the jet hangar, Rylan starts meeting other scientists, and someone besides him makes a breakthrough when they realize a bunch of other stars are also showing symptoms of astrophage except Tau Centauri. So they decide their only hope is to go to Tau Centauri and figure out what's going on there. And that's where Rylan is. I just went on for a long time about everything that happens in the first 6 chapters, but a lot happens, and somehow Andy Weir puts in that exposition and storytelling without it feeling overwhelming or dense. And we don't even meet Rocky in those chapters, and Rocky's the best! He's the other intelligent alien life form Rylan meets. While he's hopping around Tau Centauri's solar system, he sees another alien ship, and they make contact. Rocky pulls his ship up next to Rylan's, and after they establish that neither of them are hostile, tunnel. Rocky builds a tunnel to attach their ships. I should also mention that he can only do this when the ship's centrifuge is off and it's in zero gravity. But that's fine. Rylan already experienced zero G and he freaked out, his lizard brain panicked, but he survived and got used to it.
Life goes on!
Anyway, Rocky and Rylan meet, and I need to give Andy Weir credit for making such a cool alien. Aliens, there's also astrophage, which is also cool, but Rocky is so cool! He lives in a really hot, highly pressurized environment. He doesn't have eyes, and instead operates off of echolocation. He's shaped like a spider, and he's super smart and sassy and a really fun character. But I will stop going on about how much I love Rocky. No, Rylan and Rocky make contact and begin piecing together a communication system. They basically do this by holding up objects and saying their names, and even though neither of them are capable of speaking each other's native tongues, they do figure out each other's languages. And once they can communicate, they realize they're on the same mission to save their respective planets. Rocky's son is also dying. His people also sent him and a crew who died of radiation sickness into space, and now he wants to figure out how to stop astrophage too. So naturally he moves into Rylan's ship and they start working together. This sci-fi just turned into a buddy comedy. I'm so sure I went on and on about everything that happened in the first 6 chapters, only to barely talk about anything in the last set of chapters. But I am reining myself in. I do not want this entire video to be me fangirling over Rocky. So, plot. In this flashback, they start planning the Hail Mary mission. They realize whoever they send into space will need to spend a lot of time in a coma, but those are dangerous, so they start looking for people who are biologically hardwired to better survive comas, and hope they can find 6, a crew and a backup crew, to go into space. And they do. They assemble both crews, and Rylan's put back to work teaching, this time the astronauts who will be the astrophage experts since Rylan is currently the world-leading expert on them.
I've been doing some research.
And in the present, Rocky and Rylan head to Tau Centauri, the sun, to get a look at its astrophage, which aren't that different from astrophage they already have. So they head away from the sun and to the planet that is their breeding ground to see what's going on there. And while they're there, they discover a whole microscopic ecosystem, including Talmebas, the predators of astrophage, which is great, except the Talmebas are really low in the planet Adrian's atmosphere, and their fishing line collection device isn't long enough to reach them. So they have to mess with their ship so it dips closer to the planet without them falling in, and they have to go at kind of an angle. It's this whole really complicated scene that does not go smoothly for Rylan and Rocky, and it ends with the gravity getting all kinds of messed up, and Rylan ends up getting somewhat crushed by his chair until Rocky leaves his area to save him. And that was strike 1 for the book. That was the first place where I had to set it down and where it almost entered my do not finish because it made me sadless. Because Rocky got really hurt. He's used to way more atmosphere made of ammonia and stuff that's all superheated, and he basically burst into flames in Rylan's area. I should not be this upset summarizing how a fictional character got hurt, but I just love Rocky so much.
My baby!
Luckily, Rylan manages to get Rocky back into his area and works some technological magic to not save him, but he doesn't kill him. Rocky lives, and they collect the Talmebas and get out of Adrian's gravity, and everything gets better. And I should add something about the writing in this section, but I didn't make any notes on this because I just got so upset for Rocky every time I read this part and summarize it, apparently. Moving on. Somehow the last section was not the climax. I need to move on because Rocky's fine. He goes into a coma for a few days and wakes up and everything's fine, and they start working on saving their planets. Alright, science! So, in the flashbacks, Rylan finally discovers why he ended up in space. As it turns out, both the astrophage specialist astronauts were in an accident where they messed around with astrophage, someone somewhere forgot to decimal, and there was a massive explosion that killed them. And since Rylan has the gene marker that will help him survive a coma, and he's done all the training that astronauts have, they decide to send him into space even though he doesn't want to.
Me? I don't wanna. Make the baby.
As it turns out, Rylan is not a hero. Eva asked and he said no, he did not want to go die in space. So she arrested him and put a plan together to drug him with something that would wipe his memories once he woke up temporarily and set him into space with the hopes that he'd get invested in saving the world and not sabotage the mission. And unfortunately for Rylan's petty side, she was right. He keeps trying to save the world. And in the present, Rocky and Rylan have Talmebas, and now they need to get them back to Venus and Rocky's solar system so they can eat the astrophage and save their worlds. But they run into a problem when they realize Talmebas die when they're introduced to nitrogen, which Venus and Rocky's breeder planet both have a lot of. So they have to start the not that long, all things considered, process of breeding Talmebas that can survive in nitrogen-rich environments. So Rocky builds several enclosures full of Talmebas and astrophage and a little bit more nitrogen in each one, and this buddy comedy turns into a farming rancher's drama.
I wish I knew how to quit you.
And it is dramatic because they now have a tiny predator they can't see on their ship who wants to eat all their fuel. And it does! Some Talmebas escape and eat all the astrophage in the fuel bays. So while they're breeding more, they have to go through the arduous process of cleaning out each fuel bay completely and carefully refilling it with astrophage, making sure there's no more Talmebas in each, which they managed to do for 4 out of 5 bays. And then they're off again. But that was stressful. I both love and hate how stressed out this book made me.
I need a break.
Anyway, after a few weeks, they have it. They got Talmebas that should have no trouble surviving in Venus and the other planet, so they head back to Rocky's ship to drop him off and refill Rylan's ship, since Rocky has more than enough fuel to send him home. And it was so heart-wrenching and sad them saying goodbye, but it was also beautiful because Rocky's planet was saved, and I guess also Earth, but mostly Rocky and his planet. At least it seems that way at first, until strike number 2, where Rylan discovers the Talmebas escaped again. Because, as it turns out, when you're tiny, a wall doesn't quite look like a wall as much as a suggestion. And after being bred in the same tanks over and over, the Talmebas discovered how to make their way through the tanks, which Rocky's entire ship is made of. And I swear, I had to put the book down and go for a walk, and it almost got added to the list. But it didn't, and Rylan saves Rocky. He goes and he has to do a lot of science to find Rocky when he's out in space in a dead ship. But he does, and he takes Rocky home while sending his little probes back to Earth and Venus. And the book ends with Rylan on Rocky's homeworld, where he's viewed as a hero and where he's gone back to teaching. And Rocky's happy with his partner Adrian, and we're all happier for it. Alright, I brought up Stephenie Meyers, the host, at the beginning of this video, and I want to expand on it now, because it and Project Hail Mary both have aliens that I at least really liked. Specifically, they had aliens that didn't have faces, and you don't see that every day. A lot of aliens in popular media somewhat resemble humans, or at least large terrestrial Earth life, which isn't unrealistic. If life is out there, it could resemble something somewhat familiar to us, but it also might not. It could be massive versions of microorganisms or insects here on Earth. And the host and Project Hail Mary both took that concept and ran with it. I'll probably make a video on the host later because I was a preteen girl in 2008. I have feelings about Stephenie Meyers and her work.
There's so much more to unpack here.
So, Project Hail Mary and Andy Weir's aliens. I have never seen microorganism aliens before, and it is an incredible and realistic concept. Why shouldn't aliens be single-celled? And I loved Rocky. I loved how much thought Andy Weir put into him, how he was able to even exist on a somewhat similar plane as humans, why he looked the way he did, how his body worked, why Rocky's culture evolved the way they did, and how it all tied back to the insane planet they lived on that's so different from Earth. And if you're writing aliens, there's a lot to learn here, because you could go to the Star Wars, Star Trek route and keep your aliens or other fantasy creatures hominoid or resembling large terrestrial life, but you don't have to. And if you do it right, your world will be that much more interesting because you made something entirely unique without a traditional face. There is so much inspiration for what other forms life can just be by looking at deep-sea fish or microorganisms here on Earth. And there's also a lot of inspiration to be found in Andy Weir's work. So go out and read. Not this. Well, maybe this if you're a 14-year-old girl. But do go out and read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Hey, so I wrote a book and I put it up online. It's a high fantasy story with evil kings and arranged marriages and an Avatar-inspired magic system. And if you find that interesting, you should go to Wattpad or Scribble Hub where I post a new chapter every Sunday.